everyone, it is Jack from Cultaholic back once again because it's that special time of year for all of us filthy wrestling nerds. And by that, I mean it's time for the PWI 500 rankings. Now, for those who don't know, PWI is one of wrestling's biggest magazines. Every year they release their list of the top 500 wrestlers in the world, but before the magazine comes out, they kind of put forward the top 10. They release the top 10 for free as like publicity for the magazine, I suppose, and it always does big news. It's always full of debate, and it always leads to nastiness online, to be honest with you, because wrestling fans and opinions just don't really mix, do they? But I'm going to give you mine in this video, quite hypocritically so, as we run through all of the top 10 and analyze each one and, you know, see who we think might be a little bit higher in an ideal world, who should maybe be a little bit lower on the list as well. And remember, the important thing is that PWI's rankings this time run from June 2020 to June 2021. So it doesn't begin in January. It's not a 2021 list. It's the past sort of 12 months. Minus a few months this year. Oh, and by the way, it's male wrestlers only because there's a separate list for women's wrestlers. So, you know, just in case we're all wondering where Sasha Banks is, that's why. Oh, and one more thing, sorry, as well, another caveat, is that this list is kind of half kayfabe and half real. So they take into account winning big title belts and stuff rather than just focusing solely on like pro mobility, work rate in the ring, all the kind of stuff that we usually analyze, I suppose, in the internet wrestling community. So with all that in mind, let's just crack straight on with it, guys. Let's go to number 10. That was to pop the editor. Rich Swann. Now, honestly, when I first saw Rich Swann's name on here, I was a little bit surprised just in terms of where he kind of ranks amongst the global elite. I was like, oh, is he really, you know, relevant alongside all these other names? And then I looked again and I felt really bad because I was like, you know what, actually, Rich Swann's had a pretty damn good year and I think he fully deserves, I think number 10 is a pretty accurate place for him. He kind of made that leap, didn't he, to like full-on world champion main eventer in Impact Wrestling out of nowhere. I know there was a bit more of a build to it, but it did feel a little bit out of nowhere as well. Always nice to see a smaller, more athletic guy, more flippy sort of guy, you know, get a world title in a major promotion. It's still got a bit of a novelty to it, and I think he represented the company and the belt really, really well. It wasn't an easy title reign either. He beat some bigger guys, some heavy-handed guys. He feuded with the likes of Eric Young, of course, who he won the belt from, Sami Callihan, Tommy Dreamer as well, and that big unification match with Moose, which he won, to my surprise, honestly. On the downside, he did lose the belt to Kenny Omega, but this past year, everyone lost to Kenny Omega, so we can't be too mad with Rich for that. Number 9, we're heading over to New Japan, who had a bit of a difficult time of it during the pandemic, maybe more so than other promotions on their level, arguably anyway. And we're going to look at number 9, Shingo Takagi. Now, first things first, let's just get this out of the way because it is a massive reason why he's in the top 10. He had that huge win over Kazuchika Okada, the Rainmaker, at this year's Dominion to become the new IWGP World Heavyweight Championship. Champion. I'm struggling. And you know what? Even though people might think that his rise to the top of New Japan got a little bit shortcutted in a way, suddenly he was like upper mid-card and then bang, new champion. I think it's still earned. I think his level of talent really deserves it. We have to look at feuds that he had with the likes of Jeff Cobb, who he had an awesome match with at Wrestle Kingdom, Minoru Suzuki, for example, another great feud, and of course, his feud with Will Ospreay, which he didn't fare too well in, to be honest, losing in the final of the New Japan Cup and then losing in Ospreay's first title defense as well. But do I think he should be higher on the list? Because I've only said positive stuff so far. Not really, no. I think that Shingo, is this a bit harsh? Maybe feels a bit like a champion of circumstance? I don't know. I mean, on one hand, he beat Okada for the belt, which is surely very impressive. But on the other hand, would he have got there so soon without injuries and various things going wrong for New Japan? This past year, although it was very difficult for them, has kind of shaken my faith a bit in New Japan's booking. So we'll have to wait and see what becomes of Takagi in the future and if next year can be an even better one for him. Number 8, Finn Balor. Spent most of the year, of course, as NXT champion, which can only be a good thing, or at least until the sad demise of the brand that we all pretty much enjoy in WWE, and now it's going to turn into Raw Light. Balor's reign wasn't, in my opinion anyway, setting the world alight in terms of storylines and character-based stuff, but I did really enjoy the matches. It was chock full of excellent matches when you look at the reign. I think my favourite one was probably the defense against Kyle O'Reilly, where Balor legitimately had his jaw broken during the match. Very hard-hitting match, very, very good as well. But he also had great matches against the likes of Pete Dunne and Adam Cole before, of course, losing the belt to Karrion Kross. And I know that Kross has got a bit of a bad rap recently for like just the booking of him, but this match was really good if you remember. His defeat of Balor was really hard earned. Two things take the shine off this for me a little bit. One, I think that Balor as champion was overshadowed a bit by, you know, things going on just below him on the card, like the breakup of the Undisputed Era, for example. Often that encroached directly upon his title reign without him really being too involved in it himself. And secondly, you know, he lost to Karrion Kross, and in hindsight, doesn't look great. Let's move on. Number 7, Will Ospreay. very up and down year for Will Ospreay. He had a very eventful year as well, of course, turning heel and setting up his own evil stable by attacking Kazuchika Okada and splitting off from the Chaos faction. He also, of course, won the New Japan Cup in 2021 with an absolutely amazing final against the man we've just talked about, Shingo Takagi. And then something which maybe in my mind is a bit of a rarity, I haven't actually looked at the stats recently, so I'm not sure, but he then won his title shot from winning the New Japan Cup, which I don't know if that happens too often. Beating Kota Ibushi in another great match. I mean, we know that Ospreay has great matches, you know, that's just what he does. However, his title reign, after finally reaching the top of the mountain, was derailed by injury, unfortunately for Ospreay. And he has since actually gotten into an argument on Twitter with the man who we'll talk about later on, who was number 1 on this list. His argument being, you know, I could beat number 1 any day, and it was a bit kayfabe. And then number 1 was saying like, well, you know, you're rubbish, mate. And then Ospreay was saying, well, the pandemic ruined our promotion's chances of this. What about you? And I'm thinking, I don't know if the pandemic did ruin it for Ospreay. I think the injury ruined it. And I think that maybe the pandemic actually ruined his year previously in the PWI 500. So I'm not sure. Still, I think the 4 we've looked at so far, 10, 9, 8, and 7 are all roughly correct. That's in my opinion anyway. Next up, someone I think should be higher, definitely. John Moxley, who won last year's PWI 500. He came first. Now he's down to 6th. He also had a very strong start to the evaluation period. Last summer, he was, of course, AEW World Champion. He was defending against the likes of Brian Cage, MJF, Eddie Kingston. It was all looking great for Mox. But sadly, and I think somewhat unfairly as well, the most memorable part of Moxley's reign is probably Kenny Omega beating him on Dynamite, Winter is Coming, and saying, right, I'll have this belt, I'm off to Impact Wrestling. And everyone going, what? And suddenly Moxley was like a little bit of an afterthought, really. Unfortunately as well, because of the pandemic, Moxley was another person who was kind of hit by that in terms of his career. He couldn't make it to New Japan to continue his journey with the IWGP US Championship, but later on he did manage to defend it against Kenta before losing it in a bit of a banger of a match on Dynamite to Lance Archer. And of course, most recently, although I think it might just fall outside of the evaluation period, he had that very entertaining feud in GCW with Matt Cardona, which is kind of still going on, although it may have just ended. I'm not quite certain. Regardless, Moxley was a bit of an everyman this year. I think it was less just in-your-face impressive than his first year with AEW, which got him number 1 on the PWI 500, of course. But I think it was impressive in a different way. And I do feel like number 6 is way too low for him on this list, especially when we look at 1 or 2 names that are coming up. Number 5, Kota Ibushi. And honestly, right, I love Kota Ibushi. But man, there is no arguing with the start of his year, or the start of the evaluation period. Ibushi won the G1 Climax, only losing 2 matches en route to victory, which is rare. He had a really big, impressive showing at Wrestle Kingdom as well, pulling double duty, winning on night 1 against Naito to become champion, and then winning against Jay White to retain it on night 2. But then, for me, at least in my opinion, things really go downhill, because Kota Ibushi decided to unify the IWGP Heavyweight Championship and the IC Championship and make a new one, ending the lineage of 2 of the most prestigious titles in the world. Kota, mate, what are you doing? And I know this may well not have been his actual personal decision, but this is half kayfabe, the PWI 500, and I hate him for this. The match was also unified in a match against El Desperado, and again, I love El Desperado. I think he's fantastic. I think he's got a massive future ahead of him as well, if he keeps having amazing storylines like he recently has been. But El Desperado versus Kota Ibushi is not this monumental title unification match that I honestly think it should be. By which I mean, if they really have to unify those belts and end the lineage of 2 great belts, they should have had a bigger occasion, I'm sorry. Then he lost it as well, a month later, after this big grand thing. I mean, honestly, this past year has really shaken my faith, as I say, in New Japan's booking. I think they've lost a bit of their patience. I think they've lost a bit of their kind of cautiousness with booking as well, which suits them really well. And I don't think this kind of wild, flying by the seat of your pants booking really works for them. It might work in some promotions, not for the usually very serious New Japan. So I think Kota could arguably be a little bit lower, although, to be fair, the G1 Climax performances, I'll allow it. I'll be like, no, 5's all right for you there, mate. But this next person, I do not think deserves their place at all. And it's so sad because it's not their fault at all either. They are just doing the best with what they've been given. And what they've been given is it's Drew McIntyre anyway. Now, Drew's actually the only person in the top 10 to keep his place from last year. And I know, as I've mentioned, this list is half kayfabe, which means obviously that he held the WWE Championship. That's going to count for a lot. But when you analyze it, was it really that good of a time? It started off pretty well. He beat Bobby Lashley, of course, in the summer in a great match at Backlash. He beat Dolph Ziggler in maybe the only good thing about the horror show at Extreme Rules. It was all going fine. Then we had a long draining feud with Randy Orton, during which, by the way, Drew lost the belt at Hell in a Cell before regaining it shortly afterwards, which seemed really pointless as well. Then there was the whole Build to Mania fiasco. A fiasco for Drew, not for Bobby Lashley, of course. It worked out really well for him. But we had, Drew getting cashed in on by The Miz, and then The Miz losing it to Bobby Lashley. And the reason for that seemed very much to be, it's the only reason I could think of why they did this whole thing with The Miz, seemed to be, oh great, now Miz has been kind of a transitional champion, he's got the belt onto Lashley for us, and now we can have Drew win it back. Big live crowd at WrestleMania. And then Lashley won in such a shocking decision, in my opinion. Not one that I necessarily disagree with looking at the fallout, but it's very bittersweet because it's been so damaging for Drew. If you compare his character now with his character when he was winning the Royal Rumble and beating Brock Lesnar at Mania, and it's just night and day. I don't know why he's been made into this sort of comedic guy. Drew's very charming, and when left to his own devices, he can be funny if need be. But this is really ramming the comedy down our throats, and I don't agree with it. And I'd like to think that Drew knows it's bad as well. Not that he can do anything about it, but you've got to be disappointed if you're Drew McIntyre. I don't think he deserves 4 on this list, and I feel terrible saying that. Number 3, Bobby Lashley. I mean, fair enough, he does have to be higher than Drew 100%. 3 sounds high in theory, or it did at first when I was looking at this list, but then I thought, hang on, and I looked at his reign, and I was like, he's been pretty dominant, hasn't he? Elimination Chamber was the big turning point for Bobby Lashley, of course. First, he lost his US title to Riddle, which freed him up to go and move on to bigger and better things up the card, and also, as well, he attacked Drew McIntyre at that event, which allowed Miz to cash in, which eventually set off a sequence of events, which led to Bobby Lashley becoming WWE Champion. I really enjoyed that part of that episode of Raw, the Miz-Lashley episode of Raw, where Miz was trying to weasel his way out of this title shot. There was such a great sense of inevitability. Miz was such a great heel for it. Even though Lashley was heel as well, we all wanted to see him absolutely crush the Miz. And it was a really well done story. Miz seeming like he was going to get out of it, Lashley just dominating him and finally winning that belt. It wasn't all positive for me though. As I say, I think the match at Mania was very damaging for Drew. Very good for Bobby though, in all fairness. The breakup of the Hurt Business really annoyed me. I don't know what that was about. Cedric and Shelton were absolutely great alongside MVP and Lashley, and I just can't fathom why they did that. They were a wonderful heel stable. Now, of course, he's feuding with Big Bad Bill. So we'll have to see where that goes, and we'll have to see if it has an adverse effect on his ranking next year. But for now, number 3, that's probably fair, but I could see an argument for maybe a smidge lower. Number 2, this is where it gets very interesting. Roman Reigns. I think there is a very serious argument that could be made to suggest that Roman should have comfortably been number 1 this year. There might be others in places like AEW or in New Japan who have a higher ceiling than Roman in ring, who can put on matches that Roman just can't do. But I think as a complete package, which is really what wrestling's all about, as a heel on the mic, as a heel who slows down the action and grinds down opponents, as somebody who gives babyfaces hope spots and everybody's shocked, oh my god, could this happen? He's got Paul Heyman as well. As a complete package, Roman Reigns, for me, is hands down the best heel in wrestling today. He's had good feuds as well. Jey Uso, Daniel Bryan, Edge, that excellent WrestleMania main event, of course. Quite a long feud with Kevin Owens, but I think it had its moments as well. Then you had the feud with Cesaro, which made Cesaro look great for that very brief window. You had another feud with Daniel Bryan as well, of course. This recent one with Balor, the John Cena match as well. Who is there left for Roman to beat? Maybe The Rock? And then who after that? I know at the minute he's entangled with Brock Lesnar, but I feel quite convinced that he's going to hang on to that belt. He should, at least. Now, when we, in a second, talk about number 1, I totally get why that wrestler is number 1, but I think I wouldn't have been annoyed in the slightest if those 2 positions were reversed and Roman Reigns had topped this year's PWI 500. I just think he has been amazing. Amazing. I said that in a weird way. Number 1 is the belt collector himself, Kenny Omega. I mean, to be fair, he does tick all the boxes for PWI's criteria. He won lots of belts for a list that's half kayfabe in multiple promotions. That's really unusual and impressive. He also is an amazing wrestler, elite level in the ring. I don't rate his promos that much anymore, I'm finding them, I thought they worked well for the New Japan audience, where often foreign heels and stuff are like a bit over the top and the crowd could like hate on him for it. In front of an English-speaking audience, he comes across really cheesy. But that should not take away from the fact that in the ring, it's Kenny Omega, what more can you say? I think when you look at Kenny versus Roman, I think Roman's been more consistent, but Kenny's highs have been higher, if that makes sense. Amazing moments, like, for example, beating Jon Moxley, as I mentioned, and leaving for Impact in a bit of a, what is going on, groundbreaking kind of feel moment. What does that even mean? Also, as well, excellent matches with the likes of, that triple threat, I forgot about that, the Pac and Orange Cassidy triple threat, that was amazing. He's had great matches with a lot of people, to be fair. He just had a great one with Christian, and then another great one with Christian after it. So Kenny Omega is still Kenny Omega. I think, for me, Kenny is like a bit of a microcosm of AEW as a promotion. When it clicks for him, it's all guns blazing. There's nothing better in wrestling. When it's not working for him, he can seem a little bit erratic, but I totally understand why he's number one. I just think deep down in my heart, I think it maybe should be Roman. Let me know what you think. Please do leave your thoughts and opinions, of course, in that comment section down below. And stay safe out there, stay positive, and I'll see you very soon.